So the point of this video is gears more towards photographers who want to learn about CGI and how automotive CGI could be something that they could do in the future, play around with, or just learn about it in general. So first things first, there's a Facebook group called Automotive CGI, has a lot of members and members of different levels, introduction members, high-end professionals who work in the automotive industry. So if you're into learning about automotive CGI, want to share your work and get feedback, comments, all those good things, this could be a group to look into. It's just Automotive CGI on Facebook. There's a couple questions to answer, and typically, if you're a photographer that wants to learn about CGI, you get accepted. But the whole point of this group is to keep it mostly geared towards automotive CGI people. So if you're someone that does architecture and has no desire to learn about automotive CGI nor participate in the discussions, you're going to get rejected. It's simple as that. A little bit about me. My background has been CGI. I picked up CGI as a kid, learned about it, focused mainly on that. And then when I started working at a studio and really wanted to learn about automotive I learned that making these obnoxiously fake size soft boxes was not the way to go. So I bought a few strobes, bought a camera, and started learning physical photography. And that's when I figured out that real life photography is the way to go when it comes to learning of how to make CGI look real or how to improve your skill sets in CGI. So whenever a photographer wants to learn about CGI, I always tell them that you're going to do a lot better than someone like myself because photographers already know about composition, about light, about lensing, what looks good on a car, what does not. These are all things that I had to learn the hard way and I'm still learning as I go. But in a nutshell, I've been doing CGI for, I want to say almost 20 years now. Myself and two business partners, we own a company called Tiki Studios here in Detroit. Our focus is mainly automotive. We have a few other clients that we do work with that are not car related. However, our main focus is automotive CGI, and we do from stills to animations to everything necessary. So, next thing is software. There's different programs out there and they all cost different amounts of money. The first one that I recommend for anyone that just kind of wants to learn about CGI, fool around with it, but not really want to go like creating Hollywood standard animations or static assets. Now, the Keyshot is a good program. It will give you great results. However, what happens is if you want to do very unique type of imagery, whether it's rigging things, having things animate in a certain way, physical behavior, this is where the Keyshot software starts to lack. However, if you just want to create a static image, this is a good program to look into. It's fairly affordable. They have a free 30-day or 15-day trial, something like that. So this could be the first one. It's semi plug and play. You take a 3D model, you pop it in there, and you start playing around with it. The next one is VRED. Now this one is a pricey piece of software. They do have a free trial as well, so you can look into it, but this one does cost a lot more. And it's similar to Keyshot, where they have a ready to go material library, start plug and play, but this one's more for internal visual design in OEM companies, thus the price tag on it. Now, another piece of program is called Unreal. This one's becoming more or less the most popular right now in the automotive industry. Everyone wants to learn about it. Everyone wants to use it. Car companies want it. It's the it's the popular one right now. The only drawback is this is real time. It's a game engine. The results are good, but they have limitations. And the other thing is because it is real time, you need to make sure you have a good computer, depending on the quality of the model and the visual that you're going for. But it is 100% free and it is a fantastic piece of software. I personally don't use it. I've tried it and it's just something that I'm not really focused on learning right now in my career. So the program that I use is 3D Studio Max. And the basic overlook of this program or any program in general is you have a 3D workspace. And think about this. This is like your playground. If you have a like a model kit car that you build, you assemble, this is your table. So right now, let's say we have a desk. So here's your tabletop. You can rotate around it, you zoom in, zoom out. It's all in 3D space. So then you could create a box, you could create shapes, you could manipulate shapes. So this is what 3D Studio Max allows you to do, and other programs as well that are more intense, I guess is a way to phrase it. But a program like 3D Max or Maya or Blender is actually, sorry, I forgot to mention that one. So Blender 3D, and I don't think it's a Blender 3D. So Blender in general, this is 100% free software. Everything about it is free and it is fantastic. So out of all the programs I've recommended or educated or pointed out, Blender is probably the way to go. It is an amazing piece of program and it's free. So there's nothing to be said about that. It's free and it's amazing. With that said, programs like Keyshot, if I remember correctly, do not allow you to do modeling. So what that is taking like a box and you start modifying it. You start extruding edges, you start manipulating it and making it into something. So if you want to create a car from scratch, you cannot do that in Keyshot. That's more of a rendering piece of software. Where Blender, 3D Max, Maya, and a bunch of others, they allow you to model, they allow you to animate, they allow you to rig, they allow you to have physical attributes to your car, your character, so on. Other programs don't. So this is where you got to figure out is how far do you want to get into automotive CGI or CGI in general. I prefer 3D Max simply because this is the software I've learned how to use and I use it every single day. I do work for my clients from animations to statics to particle simulations. This program just allows me to do everything I need to do to get the job done. So in general, this is the program. All the programs are very similar. They have lights, they have cameras. So if you're a photographer and you're getting into CGI, this is how it kind of corresponds and relates to photography. So you have your camera. So in here in 3D Max, I use a plugin called V-Ray. And V-Ray, if I remember correctly, is available for Blender. It's not free, but it is available. You could buy it and you could get apples to apples, same results that I get. So anyhow, you create a camera and in 3D, cameras are just like real life. They have lens distortion. If you go wide angle with it, you'll get a fisheye type of distortion. If you go long, everything gets squished. And here it is. You have the focal length. So you could go 24 millimeter and get really, really wide angle results. Or you could go 85, 200 and get really long lens. So the other thing is, so let's say you shoot medium format. So that's where you go for the film sensor. So you could change that, whether it's presets or you could do like a custom, like a 54 millimeter sensor, so on. So everything in real life could move over to here. So I shoot full frame. So let's do 36, 35. So the next thing is you have the shutter speed, which you can do 1/100th of a second, whatever. And then you have the same thing. You have the f-stop, and then I believe there was ISO here somewhere as well. So f-stop, shutter speed, and then here we go. So if you install this, now you get ISO. So you have all the settings of a real camera. You have your motion blur, you have your ISO, you have your f-stop for the depth of field. And the way the depth of field works, just like in real life. So you turn it on, turn on depth of field, and now you get like a reference box here in the top viewport. And so now our focal point, let's say, is the tip of this box right here. So we make it like that. We move around, I'll make this a different color. There we go. Zoom in, and then I'll just create a teapot in the background. And then you'll be able to see the depth of field start kicking in. So now with that's an f8. So if I do like 1.4, really narrow, shallow depth of field, you can see it gets blurrier. So just like real life, all those elements are there. So the next thing, just like real life, you have light sources. So you have the ability to create a V-Ray sun. Name says it all. It's a sun system. So if I do real-time preview, it's very, very exposed, overexposed. So what we'll do here is bring this down. So ISO 100, f8, And so now we're getting shadows. We're getting our directional sunlight. If I rotate the sun around, the sun highlight, everything moves like real life. If I make the sun go lower for sunset, it gets changes. If I make it higher, and so on. And then if I do a size multiplier, we're going to start diffusing the shadows. So think of this like a cloud coming in the way. Now we have diffuse shadows. Change it back to 1, we get crisp shadows. So this is a sun system. So let's say we're going for a nighttime shot, kind of like golden hour, and now you want to add a fill light. So again, this is the program that I use, so I know how to do it very well in this. Other programs like Keyshot, VRED, they have different ways of doing things. I just know what I'm speaking about of with what I use. So the way I'm using this is, let's say I want to add a strobe light. So now I'm going to do a little disc light. Think of this like the strobe head. And then I'm going to move this out here. I'm going to turn on target, aim it at the box, and then, just like real life, change it to, let's say, a 500-watt strobe head. So now we are getting a fill, a strobe kick. And so this is where CGI has its huge advantages. So like real life, you have a strobe head, and then with CGI you turn it on, you get the flash. So we have the ability to make it invisible. So right away you don't have to retouch that out. And because I've done photography, I've shot cars with strobes. This is where I started being lazy and went back to CGI because when retouching and going through all these, retouching the flashes out from the back plates, from the reflections of the car, it's a very time consuming. And this is why I love CGI. It allows me to be able to do these things and become very, very lazy. So now I'm gonna move this and duplicate it. I'm gonna make a copy of it. So now we have our second strobe. So we're gonna kick it, we add a little rim light, and now we also have the ability to change the temperature of the strobe head. So think about this like putting a gel in front of your strobe. So we can make it 300, make it 3000, give it warm, and then we could, instead of temperature, just legitimately change the color. And we can make this any kind of gel color we want. And this is again, this is where the fun, creative aspects of CGI come in, and you have full control of how you want to play this and what you want to do. And then, of course, in CGI, the next thing is the material library. So programs like VRED and Keyshot, they have a very, very vast material library ready to go you could pick from. Now, 3D Studio Max, Maya, if you have a plugin like V-Ray, they come with presets and Corona render as well for 3D Max. It's not available for Maya, but it is for 3D Max. And these come already with presets. So for instance, with V-Ray, if I open up the V-Ray material library, so let's say I want car paint, and then I'll just pick car paint flakes wine red. So now I just drag and drop that onto the box, and now I have a car paint on there. So let's make the floor like a concrete. So I'll just add this one to my scene, and we're gonna pop that into place. And so now we have concrete floor with the red car paint box. And the beauty of CGI is it works in scale, real life scale units. So if you make, and again, I live in the States, so for me, it's the standard, not metrics units. So everything's feet, inches. So if you have a box or a wheel that's 18 inches, in CGI it's 18 inches. So it matches apples to apples. And with my background working with clients and engineering data, everything I get is to scale because it is CAD data from the OEM manufacturers. So that's the beauty of CGI as well, is everything is to scale. So if you set up a pipeline where you work in scale all the time, you never have to worry about inconsistency and things changing sizes when you go from one project to another. And again, that also helps light sources work properly, shadows, reflections, everything works accurately when you work to scale. But when you don't, then you're all of a sudden your camera lensing doesn't work right, it looks weird, and that's where all these goofy mistakes start occurring. So that's the general introduction to CGI. And the last but not least is kind of okay, You're a photographer. You do photography. You want to do CGI, however, you still want to do photography. And the question is, how do I mix the two to be able to still do the photography and have fun with it in the virtual land? So what I've done is I personally started shooting backplates and HDRIs. And what this allows me to do is put my CGI vehicles on location where I travel and visit. So, for instance, I have a very wide collection of environments that I've went to from LA, from Oregon to Idaho, here in Detroit, Atlanta, where I used to live, and wherever I go, I love urban and industrial locations. Those are my top locations to shoot. But what I do is I'll shoot backplates, and the whole idea is you shoot it where you assume you want to have a car. And then, that's the beauty of it. You can put any car you want. But when you're shooting these, that's what you look for is, okay, I'm on location. Where would I want to place the car? How would I want to position it? And you shoot the images blank, but you, of course, have to set the focal point to be where you would want the car. So like here, this industrial site in Long Beach, it was like a oil rig or something. So of course, I love foreground elements with little depth of field action happening. And so that's what you kind of do is you go to a location, you shoot all this, and what you do is you collect these assets, and then you could use these to create CGI renderings of a car in place. And what you have to do then is you don't have to, but what I personally do is I shoot a HDRI as well. And what an HDRI is it's a panoramic photo, but it is 16-bit, or sorry, not 16, 32-bit. So it has full dynamic range, and I'll open this in Photoshop so you can see what it looks like. And what this does, it allows me to get accurate reflections and accurate shadow light sources from the location that I shot this in. And what this does, it allows you to recreate a photorealistic visual as close as possible. And then of course you can start adding strobe lights and anything you want on top of that. So here's the location, and if I do the exposure slider, so if you look at Photoshop here, it's a 32-bit image. It's not 8-bit, and it disables, of course, most of your Photoshop filters. But what it does is if you lower the exposure, as you can see, everything's getting darker, but the sun itself still remains intense. And that's the whole point of it is once you capture this, you have the ability to expose the environment and have real life shadows and highlights and reflections from the location. And the way I capture these is I shoot bracketed photos with a fisheye lens, and then I just go through them and shoot, 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 and then you assemble one wide angle image. So that is the basics of capturing a location. You shoot backplates, you shoot HDRIs, and now you get home and you can actually salvage that location. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but for a lifetime. You could render as many cars as you want in there, whether it's pack shots, whether it's single cars. You could have a classic car, an exotic, a hypercar. Let's say 5 years later, a brand new car comes out, and you fell in love with the location you shot at. All of a sudden, you could update a new car in there, and that's what I love is when I'm able to, get out of the house, go out of town. Is I take my gear with me, so if I see a very cool location, I capture it. So to show you an example of CGI with a car on location. So here's a Corvette was it C8? I believe that's the new one. So here I actually went and modeled a wide body kit myself. So this is again the whole 3D Max allowing you to do different things. So I modeled wide body fenders, an obnoxious spoiler. I just had fun with it, and this was before the car came out, so it got a lot of attention on the internet. So what I have here is a backplate. Again, I shot in Long Beach. I went back to that industrial area at night, and this was during forest fires in LA last year. So there was a lot of atmosphere effects, which looked really cool at night with all the smoky, hazy effects. So I have my backplate. I have my HDRI, which is again that panoramic image. So what I'll do here is I'll turn on a preview. I have a little fill light, but I'll turn that off for now. So if I was to turn on just a preview of what the environment looks like. This is going to take a second to initiate, but it does real-time preview, with reflections, with shadows, with all the good stuff. So here's my car, and here's the environment. And once you have it set up, you could rotate it any way you want. So what you typically want to do, depending on how you shoot it, is kind of shoot the HDRIs where the car backplates were shot in the same area. So that way you could kind of get things to line up. So as you can see here, I have this fire thing matched up here. Of course, the scale is a little different, but nothing is really reflecting obnoxiously weird into the car where, it shows a very bizarre reflection. So now I'll make that invisible. And so now I have my car grounded. So this backplate was shot with a 70 millimeter. I use a 24 to 70 as my main go-to source. So here for focal length, 70. And now I have my lights set up. So now let's say you were shooting this on location in real life. You have it set up, you have a car parked. This is it. It's sitting in location. And so now this is where the fun stuff begins. So now we're going to turn on a strobe head. So, okay, now we have our strobe, and now we have the strobe head reflecting in the sheet metal, which, okay, let's say you want to take that out so that way it's not very distracting. In CG, I could just uncheck effect reflections, gone. Just like that, I got rid of that strobe head reflection. Instead of sitting there having to retouch it and making sure it doesn't look weird, just like that, it's gone. So let's say I want to copy it. Maybe I move it around. Add another fill light to the top of the front. And right now my strobe is visible to camera, which is giving me this lens flare. I could just check invisible, gone. So now we have the front of the car lit. So, okay, this is great, but we want to have a little more energy from the car to affect the environment. So let's say you want to turn on the tail lights. So all we do, we go to the rear end of the view of the car. We're just going to create a little rectangle light source, put it back here. Make it like 35 watts. Make it a red light. So now I'll just make it 500 just so I could really fake it. So of course in real life what you would probably do is you would shoot multiple exposures and then, brush it in post and then change the exposure of the ground just to make sure it looks visually appealing. So in CG, I could just overcrank the energy of the light to whatever I want. So now all of a sudden we're getting some light from the tail lights on the ground. And if I want them to be a little more directional, I just bump up this visibility. So now as you can see, they're getting further away from the car, or I can make them wider. I'll do an instance and move it back there. So now we have that. Move that further away. So now we have tail lights. And so in a nutshell, that is the basics of CGI, how you could take your photography and blend it with CG, how they correspond hand in hand, where the camera, the lensing, the strobe, the lighting information you learn from photography translates over to CGI, and then how you can still shoot and do CG with the assets you shoot. Now, if you guys have any questions, feel free to either private message me or join that Automotive CGI group on Facebook because again, there's many users, many people with different backgrounds, whether it's, from LA Hollywood, from New York, from photography. We have a very, very wide collection of artists there. And it's a very, very friendly, very supportive group.